Probably.
She's the debating champion of England and Wales. She's the past president of the prestigious Cambridge Union. She is world champion coach in this format, the World Schools Debating format for England. Please welcome Debbie Newman.
Thank you. Okay, now I'm scheduled to talk to you today about the third speech. And I'm going to do that, but in talking to you about the third speech, because this is the only real chance that I'm going to have an hour to talk to you, I'm also, through talking to you about the third speech, going to try and tell you all about my philosophy towards debating, winning debates, rebuttal generally, and all sorts of things that you can take across all of this format and also across any format of debate that you might be using in that way. But I do promise I will talk about the third speech as well.
You will have another twice 1 hour.
2 more 1 hours?
Yeah.
Fantastic, excellent.
Yeah.
So what are they on?
Well, we sent Ridian home, so.
That's probably right. Well,
yeah.
it's very hard to talk about third speeches, I think, without though talking about winning debates and how you win debates. Because the whole point of the third speech is it's the speech where you have to win the debate. Okay? The reply speech is too late. The reply speech is where you tell the judges and the audience that you already have won the debate. And you show them and you explain to them how that has already happened. So you can't make the winning argument or the winning piece of rebuttal or the winning new example or piece of analysis in the reply speech. So it has to have happened by the end of the time that you sit down at the end of the third speech. And then the reply speech is this joy where you get to stand up and hopefully not too smugly tell the audience what you've already done and what you've already achieved as a team. So that's the real focus of the third speech. There isn't any kind of onus on you to have to bring in new material. The rules state, I think, that the third proposition speaker can have one very small, insignificant new argument, but I don't remember the last time I saw any country at Worlds actually use that from the third speech. And the rules actually say that you can't have any new constructive material in the third opposition speech. So the third speech is very free in that sense. You don't have to spend an amount of your time putting new arguments on the table in that way. What you have to do is see that all of the material has already come out of the debate in the first 4 speeches, and your job is to show why everything the other side has said is wrong, and that's both the constructive material that they've brought and any attacks and rebuttal that they've put onto your own arguments. So in that way, you're defending your own arguments because you're showing why their attacks aren't valid. But it's not beyond that. It's not really just a summary speech in that way. It's not about you sort of just telling people why your arguments were really great in that sense. But it is about you responding to the attacks that the other side have put on your arguments. Now, I have to admit to you, I don't have a formula for you for a third speech. The first and second speeches, you can be really didactic about what you need to do. You know, first proposition speaker, they're going to have their rhetorical opening, they're going to have their team line, they're going to explain what the team structure is, their own speech structure, they're going to do their definition, and then they're going to do their 2 or 3 arguments. Great, it all fits into a neat formula and a neat structure. And I don't have one to give you for the third speech. Different teams and different speakers will approach the strategy of how they put together their third speeches in different ways. And for me, coming from a debating format myself, as I grew up in the UK as a school student and a university student that didn't have third speeches, that was either sort of a world university style, a British parliamentary style, or a style that was only 2 debaters on each side, I think that we've always grappled to try and get our heads around exactly how to do these third speeches and what they look like. And certainly in the 3 years that I coached, the 3 third speakers, who were my main third speakers in each year, took a very different approach actually, and a slightly different way. They found their own way of successfully doing their third speeches, and they were all very successful in their own way. So I'm afraid I can't give you a really easy set of guidelines to follow in that way, but I can talk to you about what the point of the third speech is and some ways that you can approach it in that sense. So the third proposition speech is a much harder speech than the third opposition speech, is one thing to say. Firstly, you've had 8 minutes less to think about the debate and what's happened in the debate in that way. But also, you are still doing first response rebuttal to constructive material. because the second opposition speaker is going to have introduced probably some significant constructive material in the last 4 minutes of their speech, you have to make sure that you reply to everything that's come out of that second opposition speech. Because any new constructive material that you drop at that stage is dropped. The proposition summary speaker can't come back to it because you haven't answered it. So you must make sure, whatever else happens as third proposition, that you definitely answer all of the constructive that's come out of second opposition. And that means, in a way, again, in terms of planning the structure of your speech and thinking about how everything's going to fit in, it's very tight in terms of time. Because for that last 4 minutes before your speech, you're listening to that new constructive material, formulating your responses to it, and working out how that's going to go into an overall speech structure in that way. The third opposition speech is a little bit more leisurely and laid back in that sense, because since the last time the proposition introduced new constructive material, in second proposition, you've already had a second opposition speaker who's had a chance to reply to that material. And you've had the whole extra 8 minutes of the third proposition speech. So you can spend a lot longer thinking about the organisation of your speech and the approach of your speech in that way. It's a much easier speech in that sense. But with both speeches, as I said before, the key thing is to think that you have to do what needs to be done in that particular debate to win the debate. That's the key thing that you need to be sort of thinking through all the way through debate. And this is where I'm going to sort of talk to you a little bit about my debating philosophy in general, which is to remember that the only point of you being in the debate in that way, in a competitive debate, is to win the debate. Okay? You have to keep quite a competitive mindset towards winning the debate. There's no point in just giving this amazing speech where you think, wow, that was a really, that was a Churchillian speech. I just made such great arguments. I explained them so well. I was so stylish. Everyone must be wowed by how wonderful I am. If you didn't actually do anything to help your team win the debate. Okay? So the same way, if you think of any kind of sport, so think of football or soccer in that sense, you often get a sense where the commentators will say at the end of the game, well, actually, this team played a lot better, but this team won because they scored the goals. And that's all that matters, okay? All that matters in the end is whether or not you're going to score those goals or not. Or if you think about something like boxing, okay, you can win a boxing match by landing one powerful knockout blow on the other side, and you win. It doesn't matter if they were like being better than you in terms of some kind of technique or something for a long period of time. So you need to stay focused on that sense that I really want to win this debate. And for the purpose of what we're talking about here, I don't really mean win the round in that way, because there are a whole variety of things that you need to consider when it comes to winning a debate round, because you have to think about your role on the table and your style and your timing and all sorts of things in that way. I mean like winning the argument. Okay, as if there is actually an objective force out there who will just look at the debate as it happens, the argument as it happens, and they'll decide who's won the argument. Has the motion actually been carried or defeated in that way, based on the arguments that have gone forward? And think about the debate in that sense. How am I going to win it? Now, what that means a few things. It means that it's not necessarily the team with the cleverest arguments that wins the debate, or the team who even argues their arguments in the cleverest way, in that sense, or the team that has the most arguments, or anything like that. It's the team that manages to convince you that their arguments mean that the motion has to be carried or defeated, depending on which side they're on. Now, I think that should inform everything that you do in the debate, in terms of it should inform what you do in the preparation room when you're going into the debate. It should inform the arguments that you choose when you're putting your case together, and your argument structure and your case structure. I think it should inform the way you make your arguments, so you're not just within that argument forgetting what motion you're arguing for and just trying to argue that argument really well, but you're really focused on explaining why that argument supports your side of the actual debate that you're arguing. But it also informs rebuttal, and it informs the third speech, which is where we sort of get into thinking about the third speech in that sense. So you have to, by the end of the third speech, show that your side, that the motion, say the proposition that the motion should be passed, and that the opposition haven't done anything to show otherwise. So it is, and I'm sorry, I'm saying it is in this sense. There's no, it's not written down anywhere how a third speech has to be done. And countries will do it in different senses, and different coaches, and different speakers will have a different amount of emphasis towards how much they're rebuilding their own side, and how much they're attacking other sides, and how they're doing it. So I'm not speaking a universal truth here in this way. I'm just giving you my sense and my take of third speeches in this sense. And my take would be is that it's a destructive speech. That the emphasis of it has to be to show that if your opposition, the 16 minutes that if your proposition, the 16 minutes that we've heard from the opposition, or if your opposition, the 24 minutes that we've heard from the proposition, that nothing that they have said should sway the audience in any way to vote for their side of the motion. Okay, so it's destructive. But because you are destroying their attacks on your side as well, it is by its nature about coming back to your own arguments and showing the strength of your own arguments in that way, and using your own approach to the debate and the terms that you've wanted to fight the debate on in order to attack their points. Now, a few things about the third speech though. It does have to be structured. It would be lovely if you could just stand up for 8 minutes and just say, and another thing, and another thing, and I've got another attack, and I've just thought of something else, and now on to the next thing. But the judges won't be able to make notes about your speeches, the audience won't have any idea what you're doing, and all those kind of jabs that you're making, some of them will be lost. So you do have to think, as with any other speech, about the packaging, the organisation of that speech. And you are going to need to come up with some headings, 2, 3 or 4 headings probably for an 8-minute speech in which to divide your speech and a way of analysing the debate in that sense. Might be really straightforward. I might say, first of all, I'm going to look at the practicalities of this debate and show why the attacks the opposition have tried to make on us to show that our system isn't feasible, isn't enforceable, are wrong. We're going to show you that we have put a practical idea forward to you today. And secondly, I'm going to look at the principles and show why the principled attacks of the opposition haven't been successful, and we have shown you why, in this case, the right to freedom of speech doesn't trump the censorship model that we're putting forward in that way. So it might be quite simple, something like that. But obviously sometimes in particular debates it's going to be a little bit more specific. It won't always be as easy as saying it's principle and practice, or it's economics and it's politics in that way. Sometimes sometimes your headings will have to be quite specific and quite detailed and relevant to the very specific debate that you're in that sense. If you're in a debate about whether or not parents should be allowed to smack their children, and there's been a big issue about how bad smacking really is from a physical point of view, one of your headings might be how bad is the physical damage of smacking. Okay, do you see what I mean? That's obviously a lot more specific as a title compared to I'm going to talk about the practicalities. But you need to make decisions based on what's happened in the debate about what the right headings are, what the right questions are that you need to approach in that speech. Do try and get everything in. Try not to do a kind of, but before I do that I'm going to do some rebuttal or something. Try and come up with ways of fitting all of the material that you want to make within the headings that you put forward. And when you come up with those headings, keep thinking about what do we need to do to win. So what do we need to do to pass the motion, and what do we need to do to make sure their motion is destroyed in that way. In terms of how you get to those headings, different people do take different amounts of notes during debates. I take loads of notes. I'm writing down practically everything that everyone's saying as they're going along, and just jotting my own notes down. And as it's getting closer towards my speech, I'm starting to think about and formulate those headings and get my notes underneath the headings that are going forward. But note taking is really personal, and you need to do the kind of note taking that works best for you in that sense. But by the time you stand up, make sure that you've got those clear headings in front of you. And as a team, don't just like leave the third speaker on their own to do that. It's not that easy. Help them think about, you know, as a group, come up with those headings, you know, talk to them, tell them you've got to hit that, you've got to defend that, this is the key point at this stage. You're still there as a team, trying to win the debate together as a team. So do communicate, obviously quietly, don't want to disturb the room, but don't feel that like, oh, that's just the third speaker's job and we hope he does a really good job, we hope she does a really good job. Work together as a team to prepare the best approach to the debate. In terms then of how do you effectively kind of attack everything that's come out of the other side, what are the kind of rules in terms of prioritising and looking at the debate. I'm going to talk to you just a little bit generally about rebuttal and how we can do that. So although we're doing this within the third speech, these things can often be true as well at the beginning of every speech if you have a rebuttal burden to do as a speaker. There's nothing more frustrating as a judge than watching people get hold of something that someone said in a speech before, and they're so pleased that they've worked out that it's wrong or they can say something against it, that they just attack it for the sake of it. Never really show why it might be helpful in any way to the speaker that they've attacked it. So someone stood up and said they're doing a debate about the UN and like whether or not the UN's effective or not. And somebody's been making a point, the proposition's been making a point about how the UN wasn't effective because America often acted unilaterally against the UN, and we can see a good example of this in Iraq and the fact that America invaded Iraq in 2002. Okay? It is not good rebuttal to stand up and go on the other side. Well, they said that America invaded Iraq in 2002, and actually they didn't. It was 2003. And my next piece of rebuttal on their next point. Okay? Like, you have not done anything to help your side. What you have done is attack a fact that backs up an example, which backs up an argument. So you haven't done any real damage to that argument at all in terms of whether or not people are going to support that sort of motion. So you need to think about what it is that you want to attack. Make sure that you take every opportunity you can to make kind of what we call technical or strategic attacks on the other side. Okay? These things are more about trying to placate the judges and get the judges to vote for you rather than this kind of pure idea of winning the argument, but they're really good. Okay? If someone on the other side has contradicted someone else on their team, point it out. Lots of judges will say that if a team contradicts themselves but the other side doesn't point it out, then that cancels itself out. Because one team contradicted itself, and that's bad, but the other team never pointed it out, and that's bad. So it just ends up being a zero-sum game. So if you've spotted a contradiction on the other side, point it out as a piece of, as an attack. Likewise, sometimes, and I think this is more common, often it's not in terms of a contradiction that literally one person said one thing or one person said something that contradicts it. You often see in a three-person format a slide of arguments. So perhaps somebody started off with quite a strong, firm argument that they want to put forward, and they've been quite bold. And as that argument has been attacked, the next speaker said, well, you know, obviously we don't mean it that much, we only mean it like this, we mean it much less. And people sort of withdraw into themselves and make something much more moderate, or vice versa. Sometimes someone might start off with actually something quite realistic and moderate that they want to achieve. And as the debate is going on, we're getting bigger and bigger claims for what we're going to manage to achieve from these ideas. So if you have a slide, talk to the audience about it. Almost step outside the debate and say, well, what we've seen here today was the first proposition speaker told us this, but then under attack from that, it's changed into this. Okay, so it's almost outside of the argument itself, attacks on the debate. Dropped arguments count under this one as well. Okay? Make sure that you've got a list of all of the arguments, including subpoints, that the two people before you, if you're the third speaker, have made, and tick them off as the other side attacks them. So you can put big circles around the ones that they drop. And even if they didn't feel that important at the time when you made them, you want to make sure that if they haven't been attacked, that you make them really important. Okay, we haven't heard any response to this argument. And here, let me tell you now, remind you why this argument that we made was so crucial. And this crucial argument has just been conceded by the other side by their silence. Also in this category, you get anything to do with definition. Hopefully you won't be in any definitional debates ever. It's perfectly possible to go through 30, 40, 50 world schools debates and never get into an argument about the definition. But if it does happen, and there is a definitional conflict going on in the debate, you can't drop it. If you as a speaker think, well, actually, this definition debate's been going on, and I'm bored of it now, so I'll talk about something else. The other side, if they get the last word on the definition, will implicitly win the definitional debate. And how can you win the debate if you've lost the definitional debate? Because that's the rules of the game that you're playing with them in that way. So don't drop anything in terms of definition. If you need to defend a definitional stance, then make sure that it comes through and that it's prioritised in that sense. After those types of attacks, you get into the ones which are more about the argument itself rather than the way the argument has been presented by a team. And you get foundation arguments. Okay? These are the arguments on which a team has built their case. Crucial to what the team is putting forward in this sense. So if you can knock away the foundation, the whole case should collapse. It's like a bottom card in a house of cards or something in that sense. Now sometimes teams will be very clear about what their foundation arguments are. Sometimes they will stand up and explicitly say, what we need to prove to you today is argument X, and we're going to do that. Now that's like a nice big flag for you that argument X is their foundation argument. Don't necessarily believe them. Use your own logical processes to work out, is that what they need to prove? Or do they actually need to prove something else in order to prove this debate? But often they will give you a hand in that sense. If they don't flag it up, if they give you a shocking list of arguments, if they say, we want to ban smoking and we've just got 5 reasons and we're going to go through our reasons, you need, as the other side, to work out what those foundation reasons are in that sense. Think, what do they actually need to prove in order to prove that we should ban smoking? In that way. So foundation arguments always need to be prioritised. A foundation argument could be something like a link. You often get in debates, the reason that we're going to ban violent video games is because they increase violence in society. So a foundation attack could be to attack the link between playing violent video games and violence in society. Or the reason that we want to give out free contraception in schools is because we want less teenage pregnancies and sexually transmitted diseases. So if you can attack that link and say, well, actually putting contraception in schools won't have that effect, it won't have the cause the thing that you want to happen, then the debate should be kind of game over in that sense if you can win those arguments. So sometimes they're causes. Sometimes they're the key thing that someone wants to achieve. So if someone says the reason we want to give Kurds an independent homeland to the Kurds, to use an example from the debate we had yesterday, the proposition in the debate I saw was making a strong argument about the fact that we needed to protect that the Kurdish people are an oppressed people, and we needed to protect them from oppression. So that would be a foundation argument in that sense. So the opposition could try and show that actually that wouldn't be what would happen. And if you could prove that there wouldn't be less oppression under their model, if the reason they said they're doing it is for less oppression, you can prove that there's less oppression, then you've made a kind of fundamental blow on their case in that way. Sometimes an attack on a foundation argument isn't a head-on attack of why it's wrong, like the ones that I've said to you so far. Sometimes it might be why they've got the wrong foundation argument. That might be the attack. Because remember, overall, we're always coming back to the motion itself. So, for example, imagine you're in a debate about privatising public utilities. And the proposition, I put forward a big argument that they say the most important thing with public utilities is that we have the most efficient public services possible. So we want the best services, the most efficiency for the best value for money. That's the most important thing. That's what this debate's about, and we're going to tell you now why the private sector is in the best position to provide the most efficient public utilities. As an opposition, you have two ways of attacking that kind of foundation argument. You can agree with their terms. You can say, we absolutely agree this debate is about how we get the best value, most efficient public services, and we're going to attack your foundation argument and show that actually it's the public sector that provide us with the best utilities, the best water and gas and communications and transport and whatever else has been defined under utilities. Or you could have decided, and obviously you can't decide this on the hoof in a debate when you're just about to speak. This has to be about the approach you've decided as a team in the preparation room. But you could decide that it's the opposite. You could decide that actually what you want to attack is you want to say, yeah, we absolutely agree. Private companies are really, really good at doing absolutely everything, at cutting every corner possible to be as efficient as possible. And the reason, that's the exact reason why we want to keep public services in the public sector, because we see that the most important principle here isn't efficiency, it's equality. And they're wrong to want efficiency, because efficiency means people who live in isolated geographical areas don't get their services, or people who are poor don't get their services in that sense. So it's a completely different type of attack. It's not saying that your argument's wrong, it's saying your argument is right, and your argument does not mean that your side of the house wins the debate. Yeah? It's always coming back to that idea. As you're listening to an argument, you're not thinking in your head, is this argument right, is this argument wrong? What can I say about this argument to show that it's wrong, or to show that it's flawed in some kind of way? Instead, what's going through your head as you hear every argument is, why does this argument not mean that I should support the motion? That's the strategic mindset, critical thinking that should be going on and going through your head in that way. After foundation arguments, you've got additional benefits. So if we come back to an argument about banning smoking, for example, let's say the foundation arguments have been that the government has a duty to protect people from harming themselves, and secondly, obviously, as a result of that, smoking is significantly harmful to yourself. And the proposition would say, if we win those two things, if we show that yes, we're right about that principle, that we need to protect people from harm, and secondly, that cigarettes are really dangerous, then they're the foundation arguments. So attacking either of those would mean that the debate is over in that way. But you hear all sorts of other things in debates about banning smoking, right? What kind of other arguments do you get when, if you were putting forward an argument for banning smoking, what else might you say?
It harms the healthcare system.
Okay, so yeah, resources, in that sense, it's a drain on our resources.
Yeah, it hurts seeing people always leave the cigarette butts lying around everywhere.
Okay, litter, bad things in that way, yeah.
It's a deterrent to commerce. It can be if you have people smoking in large populations in some places, and they won't want to go to those places.
Yeah, great.
It hurts the bystanders. It harms the health of bystanders.
Okay, yeah, I mean, you might decide that that one might be a foundation one, actually. Possibly you might want to say, actually, what the government has to do is protect people from third-party harms, and there's a significant third-party harm in smoking, so that could be foundation. But all of those other ones, right, no one would say that the reason that we should ban smoking is because there are cigarette butts on the floor, or because it might harm commerce in that way. These are not, or because it puts a strain on the health service, because so do sports put a strain on the health service, because people twist their ankles and do their knees in and they have to go to the health service. It doesn't mean that we ban sport in that way. So none of those things are actually the reasons why you ban smoking. So you could beat those arguments, you could comprehensively show that all 4 of those arguments were rubbish arguments and still lose the debate if you haven't concentrated on thinking about the foundation arguments. If you think about your prioritisation, still hit those arguments, right? Absolutely show why each of those arguments is wrong. But when you're thinking about time, and thinking about like how much time to spend on these things, you don't necessarily have to spend the same amount of time with them. And you can show, again, why they're irrelevant. If somebody stands up and says the reason that we want to ban smoking is because there are cigarette butts everywhere, you don't have to say either, no, that's not true, there aren't cigarette butts everywhere, okay, that you can accept that the argument's true. You don't have to say there are cigarette butts everywhere, but that's a great thing, we like that you haven't identified something that's wrong. You only have to show that that's not a reason to ban smoking. Okay? So, and again, you can talk about it in the same kind of way. We don't ban things because they potentially create litter. We don't ban fast food because fast food packaging is dropped around. If we have a problem with litter, we can put fines on for litter. It's not a reason for restricting people's rights in that sense. So always keep the strategic mindset of coming back to winning the debate. Underneath additional benefits, you've got examples and analogies. Now, I've put a little arrow here because when I first came up with this, I thought examples are definitely underneath additional benefits. Because if you attack an example, doesn't mean, even if you successfully attack the example, it doesn't mean that the argument falls. The argument is based on the logic and the analysis of the argument. So a team can always stand up and say, yeah, okay, maybe they're right that this isn't the best example in that sense, but it doesn't mean that the argument isn't true because of X, and here's another example. So you haven't actually harmed the argument in that way. In the same way with an analogy, it's not the kind of core of an argument. I'm increasingly coming to think that actually, you might be better off to attack the examples and analogies of a foundation argument over attacking an additional benefit. Because it's so important to beat a foundation argument, maybe you actually do want to beat every part of it, and every part of the analysis that's been put forward for it, and every example and every analogy, and just comprehensively destroy the argument that you have to destroy in order to win the debate. So sometimes I think now that I might actually put this one forward. But certainly in terms of under the foundation argument, attack the actual argument first before you attack its examples or analogies. And then in the same way with additional benefits, attack the actual argument, not just the examples. Attacking an example doesn't, in and of itself, necessarily hurt the argument. Okay, and then again, kind of within that, in that sense, underneath the examples, don't, for the sake of it, kind of pick up on the fact that someone got the wrong name or someone got the wrong year. It's not relevant. I mean, you can say if you want, oh, by the way, it was actually X, but don't think that you're in any way attacking an argument or helping yourself win a debate by doing that. You should see it as being more that you're being kind by educating that person and just kind of correcting them in the mistake if you want to do it in that way, and to make sure that the idea is correct. But it certainly wouldn't replace doing any of these things in that sense. Okay, at the bottom, anything else, right? Where someone comes from, their accent, what they're wearing, what they look like, anything that's not about the actual arguments of the actual debate that we're talking about in this sense. Now, as I say, this can't inform a structure of a speech, can it? It's not about that. This is about a strategic mindset. This is about training yourself in the way that you're listening during the debate, in a way that you're thinking, in a way that you're prioritising, so that you're always thinking, is what I'm saying at this particular moment in time helping me to win this debate? To really keep hold of that. And although I wouldn't ever encourage an aggressive speaking style, I do encourage a really aggressive thinking style. Okay, you really want to destroy the other side. You really want to kind of think as if you were someone that cared passionately about the issue that you're arguing for, and really thinks that anyone who might argue against you is probably a pretty bad human being, or at least someone that hasn't put enough thought into the issue, and that anyone who listens to what you can say about the issue is going to agree with your side, because you know that you're right in that way, and that you're going to show it as you go through. So thinking about it in this sense. Does anyone have any questions about that bit before I go on? No? Okay. Obviously the flip side of this as well is, particularly between this and this, that should inform the way you construct your cases as well. Yeah? Why are you spending loads of time going on about like the littering effect of cigarette butts if you haven't really established and proved that the government has a duty to try and protect people from using addictive and harmful substances? Doesn't mean don't make the point. Okay, it might be that you want to talk about the additional benefits or the additional disadvantages. But firstly, they're almost definitely going to come in the second speech, aren't they? Because they are sort of additional material in that way. And secondly, when you're thinking about coming back to defend your own arguments, keep that mindset of don't spend ages defending the cigarette butt argument if you need to prove that government duty is more important than freedom of choice. Think about those core issues in the debate. And hopefully as well, the way in which you think about foundation arguments will help you come up with those titles that you're going to use and the structure that you're going to use in the authorisation. You're going to want to make sure that you're really winning the argument by the time you get to the end. So the other thing about third speeches and about rebuttal in that sense is, again, when it comes to rebutting, so this tells you which arguments you should be prioritising, but it can inform as well the way in which you choose to attack arguments. Okay? Because again, you're still thinking not about the argument itself in isolation and how clever that argument is, but whether or not that argument, how you can attack that argument to show that it doesn't help their side of the house. Which might mean sometimes you have a choice between, on the one hand, explaining why an argument isn't right and deconstructing it in a lot of detail, or sometimes quite quickly dismissing it by quickly showing why it isn't very relevant, or why it isn't very significant. So don't be afraid to kind of use your own strategic filter to think about whether or not an argument can be dismissed pretty quickly, just by showing that it's just not very important in that way. But some other arguments will have to be shown to be, logically incorrect, or wrong in principle, or factually incorrect in some kind of sense, in order to sort of put the biggest blow on them in that sense. Next idea about when you're doing rebuttal in the third speech or any other speech is, do be quite clear about what material on the other side it is that you're attacking. So in that sense, you can use the labels that the other side have used, and sometimes even slightly summarise the arguments that they put forward. So you might sort of stand up and say, and now onto this argument that the proposition have been making about how this is going to stop the human rights violations. And what they've basically said here is that the Kurds are having their human rights violated all over the place, and if we give them their own homeland, they'll be able to escape to it. Now show why that's wrong. Okay? And by doing that, you can show why your attack is quite specific on the actual material that they've put forward. Rather than if you just stand up and say, this won't help human rights violations because you're making the audience and the judge find the argument that they made, work out which argument it is that you're attacking, and kind of draw the link that you've been attacking that argument. So be quite explicit with the way that you're attacking arguments in that sense. They said this, and it's wrong. In terms of thinking as well about that kind of quite aggressive attack, I really want to win this debate, I am the person who's right in this argument way. Think about the way that you use language when you're attacking the other side as well. It's become very common. I picked someone up on this yesterday who'd done some debating in Britain. I don't know if it's common in America as well. It's becoming very common, a speech tick in Britain now, to start sentences by saying, we say. You know, they say this, but we on this side of the house say this. Okay? Try not to do that. You're not, because that suggests a mindset which is saying, look, these very reasonable people have come forward with a very reasonable argument, they say this, and now we're very reasonable people and we're going to come forward with another reasonable argument, and now it's up to you to choose which one you want. And you can be much more proactive than that in trying to make sure that it's your side that's chosen in that way. What you want is they say that and they're wrong. Okay? They say that and it is morally reprehensible that they say that. They say that and they clearly don't know when they say that the actual truth of the matter is this. So you always want a kind of sense of the fact that you are speaking wisdom and truth and facts and reality. Not that you're just putting forward another alternative interpretation of an issue that you hope that people would agree with. So try and land attacks quite significantly in that way. Of course, the other reason why you shouldn't say something like we say in that way is because it's obvious, right? You're standing up and you're saying it. In the same way that in an essay you don't start every sentence saying I think or I believe. You clearly think that, you clearly believe it because you're writing it. It's the same way standing up and saying it. But I think in a persuasive speech it's even more important that you don't say that. I think it dilutes what you want to do, because what you actually want to do is say, you know, we have a responsibility to these people. Not, well, what we on this side of the house say is that we have a responsibility towards these people. Okay? We have a responsibility towards these people. And the opposition are derelict in their duty when they say that we don't. So it's about them and about you and the reasonable audience who, once you've explained to them and shown them what the debate's really all about, are clearly going to be supporting you and your reasonable side. Any questions on that part? Right, well we've got to 2:30. When it comes to doing third speeches this afternoon, bear this stuff in mind. Think about that idea that you have to win the debate. You have to show why the attacks that they've made on your side aren't standing. Using the material that you've already put forward, show why that's still the material that's still standing despite the way it's been attacked. Show that their constructive material is invalid or irrelevant or insignificant and shouldn't be reasons to vote for their side or support their side. And just really have that mindset of you are in the right, believe it, don't sort of put yourself too much as someone pretending to believe it. For the actual course of the debate, believe it and find the arguments for why your side is right and speak with conviction and attack to show the judges, the audience and whoever this objective person up there is that can decide on whether or not the argument has been won and the motion will be defeated or carried. Show that person that it's going to be your side of the house. Okay.